Welcome to the Rising Society podcast. I am Shane Kennedy.
I'm Nico Galliano, the rejected gentleman.
And we have a special guest. Nico, you want to introduce him?
I will introduce him. Today we have my own father, Ben Gagliano. Dad, you want to introduce yourself?
I think you just did.
There it is. Man of little words, which is going to lead to an awkward podcast.
So what I'm going to... So I do want to go ahead and throw something out here. Ben's greatest accomplishment is right here.
That is correct. That is a factual statement. Factual statement. What do you think about that, Dad?
I think my hole-in-one in a PGA course was my greatest.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fair.
Well, you know, our opinions can differ, and that's okay. You know?
Just kidding.
So what do we got on the docket today, Shane?
All right, so...
Can I take the glasses?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You just rip them off?
Yep. Take them off and swap them.
They start off the show wearing these stupid glasses. I don't know why, but, you know.
Well,
anyways.
I mean, mine are awesome.
Well, you're the only one that never takes them off.
That is correct.
But your glasses are so awesome with
Much
the
better,
flamingos.
by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what we're going to talk about...
All right, well, first I'd like to define my role here. So, the reason why I'm here tonight is because...
Oh, boy.
These guys have, 12, 14 different podcasts, and I occasionally listen to them.
It's number 18.
Yeah, number 18.
Number 18, they say. And I'm here to, they spot out a lot of stuff that, it's their opinion, but it's actually kind of sometimes disingenuous because they don't know what the hell they're talking about. So I'm here just kind of a fact checker to keep them in line. And kind of, they get off tangent and off topic sometimes, so I'm kind of going to bring them back.
I would like your first role as fact checker to check your statement right there, because that was false.
Boom!
Because that was false. First of all, you can't say we say misleading, not factual statements. I will concur that one of us does do that quite often, but I would like to abstain from that.
I didn't mention any names. I just said the show in general, even though you guys may truly believe it, and you guys are actually saying as fact in your mind's eye, it might be fact, but some of those statements can what's the word you guys are using on the outskirts?
On the outskirts of
reality.
Okay.
Well, so first thing I want to point out is something can be on the outskirts of reality and still be it's still within reality. If it's not even in the outskirts of reality, then it's not reality, right?
Yeah.
So something can be in reality and it can be in the outskirts, but it's still technically in reality. And
that's the whole argument. Yeah.
Right. Now,
correct.
Now, so
correct.
But the thing I'm going to say is that I'm going to take a leap here, and please feel free to fact check me. Mm-hmm. Neither one of us have ever made an incorrect statement on this podcast. Ever, not once.
And that is definitely your opinion.
And
that's a fact. That's a fact check.
Exactly. Well, and so the thing that I would the burden that I would place on you is to right now cite an example when Nico or myself have ever said anything that's not 100% factually true on this podcast.
Don't do that. He will watch all 93 hours of this and come back with a fucking list on the next podcast.
I don't even have to lie. Just watch out.
I was just joking too. So just for the record, I was just
remember which one
joke.
it was, but it was the second or third podcast where they ranted about religion, and there are so many. What's the word I'm looking for? So many misstatements in there that they spewed out as fact, and it just simply wasn't.
Well, and listen,
let's move on. Let's not talk about past events. Let's just stay on.
But listen.
So Shane, what is the topic for today?
Here. Last thing.
He has to have last statements.
Oh,
we just give it to him, or he'll be uncomfortable. He'll be like sand in your shorts after a beach day.
You can feel free to disagree with me and disagree with reality if you want. Mm-hmm. Right?
Mm-hmm. Well put. So what is the topics for today, Shane?
I'm kidding, Ben. I may have made one or two misstatements at one or two particular times, during the...
One or two or 10 or 20.
So what we're going to talk about...
Who's counting, really?
Are the new standards for social studies in Florida. Kamala Harris recently made a huge... She really got very upset and spoke very passionately about how the new social studies standards, specifically regarding teaching slavery in Florida, were wrong, morally wrong, ethically wrong, everything, and just factually incorrect. she got very passionate, right? And also too, Whoopi Goldberg and the ladies on The View, or Whoopi Goldberg and the Harpies on The View, got very, very upset.
Sounds like a really shitty band.
Yeah.
Whoopi Goldberg and the Harpies.
And the Harpies, yeah.
And it's about equivalent to a shitty band.
Yes.
Have you, just to, in support of what you're saying, anytime that I want to know exactly what the radical left is thinking, I just turn on The View on a subject. Because they don't care what it is. They will sink to the bottom in unpopularity just to attach themselves to whatever extremism is going on. Whoopi Goldberg has a record of doing that, though. And I would like to point out, I just want to make a statement so it's out there, public knowledge. I believe her husband is actually mixed, right? He's black and white.
Whoopi Goldberg?
I believe so.
I didn't even know she had a husband.
Yeah, no one does. Because she never publicly talks about him. But he is white and black. Which means that he's neither white nor black. He's mixed. That is an actual thing. But we pretend like it's not.
Sort of like the Michael Jackson song.
I don't even know if Whoopi Goldberg is married or not.
Well, she is. So you can check it. It's a fact.
I can always ask.
But anyways, just go on because I'm going to go on a tangent about that woman.
So the standard, Florida, the Florida state curriculum, like most state curriculums around the country, especially after.
I need to interrupt for a second. I need you guys to let me see if I can, real quick. This last statement that he made. I don't know if you'll be able to hear this audio, and if not, I'll turn it off. But let's see if I can bring this up.
Is this on religion?
No, absolutely not. This is something Shane said that I want to clarify.
Before we go on to the... Okay. So we're going to take a step back. What's the subject on that?
You're not going to be able to hear it, I don't think.
Can you summarize it for us?
Basically, it's a man making comparison about a donkey and a tiger, and they argue about the color of the sky, and they take their argument to the king of the jungle, which is the lion. And the tiger's position is that the sky is blue, and the donkey's saying that the sky is green, right? And they present their cases to the lion, and the lion punishes the tiger.
Slide that over a little.
He punishes the tiger, and they say, why? And after the donkey leaves with glee, the tiger says to the lion, why are you punishing me? You know I'm right. He goes, of course you're right. I said, I'm not punishing you because you're right. I'm punishing you because you're dumb for arguing with a fool.
I've been on this podcast for 18 episodes. I never remember him telling that story.
Who?
Shane.
Yeah,
Shane.
No.
Never once have I ever told that story.
I thought you said this is what he said. I was I've never fucking heard him say that.
No, you made it said that he's going to make the last statement. And the point is that if you argue with a fool, you're just wasting your time.
Oh, that the clarity at which I just... Yes, that metaphor was perfect.
Right?
100%.
I wish I could play this. I got it playing on it's right here. So, see, he says this, when you argue with a fool, you're arguing with somebody who doesn't care about the truth. You don't argue. It's a waste of time. It's not necessarily about the truth. It's when you argue with a fool. Not that I'm saying that Shane's a fool. What I'm saying is that when you argue points, right? When they're not based on truths, even though the example I gave was actually based on truth, as everybody knows the sky is blue, right? When you argue with somebody who don't care about the truth, whether you're left wing or right wing, right? Where all you want to do is prove that you're right, or you want to push a certain ideology, you want to make your ideology above everybody else's, right? It's useless to argue with somebody because you're not going to change. They're not having a mature, intellectual discussion.
Well, Shane does always back up his argument with facts, though.
I understand that, but this argument about he was making, it's kind of, I was kind of making a joke about his religious arguments are always correct, and it is simply not.
I will say when it comes to religious arguments, Shane takes it from a perspective of, and I do this as well because we see it as truth, right, and other people don't have it. So when we argue definitions on religion, Shane and I take factual truth from Catholic history and Catholic doctrine and Catholic stuff like that. So when we make points, we hold ourselves to that standard. Well, when someone's an atheist or of a opposing view, like when we talk to Sebastian,
Right.
he doesn't have those definitions that we use as truth. So it makes it very hard to ever break any ground because we don't even have the same definitions to be able to talk. So when we talk, he's like, that's crazy. You guys are crazy. But we look at these are historical points in time that actually happened. But to Sebastian, they're not.
Well,
Historical points.
two things that are
recorded
important.
by who though?
Fact,
Now be-
fact, and philosophy
Well, you can bring it
are
up from
both
writings.
very important.
Yes,
Okay,
you
but-
can bring it up from historians of the time period. You don't have to use the Bible.
It's true. It's true. But remember that, being a history buff that I am, histories are always written by the victor,
They are.
right? So it's
But I would argue
it is a truth, but it's a version. It's a version of the truth from the perspective of the time frame that it was done.
Yeah, but I would argue that for the longest time, Christians weren't the victor. A lot of them were put to persecution, and a
Right.
lot of their stuff couldn't even be written down because it would be destroyed.
Right, because what would they be persecuted for? Because a lot of some of the original Christians were sects of different Jewish communities.
Yeah, because
The original Christians were Jews.
100%.
Right.
For the longest time. And you got to remember, even the Jews were against the Christians that were coming out of the Jewish faith.
Right.
So when you had that, they were persecuted by the Romans, by the Jews. It goes on and on and on. So they could only pass it down through word of mouth. What we take as the historical stuff is all the people that were persecuting them. They're historians. We have Roman historians and Jewish historians. They wrote about these events as a historical thing, nothing to do with biblical
Right,
or
right.
mysticism or
Understood. Yeah,
anything
I'm
like
not-
that.
I'm not arguing
So
that.
we know these
Tacitus
things
and
happen.
Flavius Josephus are two.
Flavius
two
Josephus
examples
is
just
one of the
right off
most
top.
famous. These are people that didn't even believe in the Christian faith, but they talk about these events.
Right.
So we know, but Sebi doesn't hold that. Or I shouldn't say Sebi. I don't want to get specific
I
in
was
name.
trying to roll. I didn't want this to turn into a religious argument. I was trying to kind of roll this back into what our current conversation was.
Mm-hmm.
Is that we want to roll it back to the comments that Kamala Harris was saying, and that slavery. I mean, nobody in their right mind is going to sit here and tell you that slavery was okay. But slavery is not an American institution. Slavery has been around for a millennia, for thousands and thousands of years. Civilizations have conquered other civilizations and made slaves out of the people they didn't kill. All right? If you look at the Egyptians, if you look at the Romans, if you look at the Carthaginians, if you look at the Persians, I can go on and on and on and name civilization after civilization that conquered. Even African civilizations, South American civilizations that have conquered other nations and turned them into slaves. Some of the wonders of the world we wouldn't have today if it wasn't for slavery, basically.
You'd be hard to find a civilization that didn't implement
Right.
or suppress another.
Right.
A matter of fact, I probably could throw the challenge out to find them. It would be almost non-existent.
Right.
If I can't think of one that didn't suppress another clan, tribe, country,
Right.
city into submission if they had the power to do so.
Right. Now, my point here is slavery is an atrocity, right? No human should be able to cage and own or conquer and treat another human as a subhuman. All right. I'm not
Correct.
saying all right. So, and I'm trying to roll this back to what the Florida educational, the whole new thing is. So, I forget the gentleman's name that wrote it. He's got a PhD in education. His name's Thomas.
You just mentioned the name earlier. He's
the one that was picked by the Department of Education to write this new curriculum, if you will. These new standards. Or what are they called?
Keep talking. I'm going to look it up.
Yep.
Okay. So he's the one that wrote this thing. And I heard
He's an African American gentleman, correct?
Yes, he's a black gentleman. And Kamala Harris's comments, which I don't understand, she's trying to make a point. She's cherry picking certain parts of that education of the standards, and saying that it doesn't matter that it was written by black folks, that they are ill informed. Now, you're talking about a guy who's got a PhD in education, who's been in education for probably the better part of his adult life, 30, 40 years, and he's writing the educational standards, him and his group, not just him himself. Obviously, it takes a group of a committee that is writing these standards. And from my understanding, the committee has a lot of African Americans on it. But obviously, he's the chairman of this committee, and he's writing these standards. And she's saying that just because they're written by African Americans, or he's the head of committee, or he's approved these standards, that he's wrong, because they're in that standards put down slaves and indignant slaves. That it's an atrocity to slaves to say that slaves earn skill sets from being enslaved. That nobody wants to be enslaved, and those comments are true. Nobody wants to be enslaved,
Nor should be.
nor should be. But to say, from a general principle, just take the one comment that she's like focusing on, right? To say that,
They're buzzwords.
yeah, I mean, she's glory mongering, if you will. So, if you look at the statement at face value, to say that somebody who's been incarcerated, even in our modern today's society, right? Isn't that what incarceration in our modern society is to take somebody and rehabilitate them and teach them new skill sets so they can go out and be productive members of society? Now, I'm not saying that's, the gentleman's name is William Allen, by the way, but to say that slaves didn't learn skill sets, even while they were enslaved, and use those skill sets that they learned in their life of freedom, right, is not an incorrect statement. That is a very correct statement. I mean, we even today, I have a friend of mine who I'm not going to mention, but he's a black gentleman, and his father was a sharecropper. So to be sharecropping, those skill sets, right, farming, agriculture, had to be passed down from generation to generation to generation, or he wouldn't be able to do those things.
They were learned somewhere.
Right, those
Things
skills
can come out of tragedy.
Right,
They
you.
will
Yeah.
shape your future. Just like
Yeah.
Sparta in the rebellion when they were slaves against Rome. They learned how to fight in the gladiatorial arena.
Exactly.
And they used those skill sets to rebel against
Yes,
Rome.
Exactly my point. So to say, and like I say, I'm not justifying slavery in any way, shape, or form.
Zero.
But to say that the incarcerated people, in this case slaves, didn't learn skill set that they used when they were freed would be incorrect, even though it was an atrocity to be enslaved, right? And she makes this whole argument on this sole bias, this factual statement that they didn't benefit from slavery, which in fact they did, not from being enslaved themselves, but from the skill sets that they learned that they used. I mean, out of that they became farmers or sharecroppers, if you will, agriculture. They learned agriculture. They learned printing. They learned blacksmithing. They learned farrieing or
Multitude of trades.
yeah, multitude. They learn how to seamstress, right? They learned a multitude of trades that came out of that benefited them in their future life. And to be upset about that, or to be upset about somebody making that statement, which is made by the Florida Department of Education through Mr. William Allen and his committee, is incorrect. And I think she's just glory mongering. I mean, she's just taking one particular sentence of the Florida Educational. And I am a Floridian, and to say that, to bash a state because of one statement, and because they're trying to make what it is listen, it comes down to this: Ron DeSantis is running for president, and do I think he should? No, I don't. But he's very conservative, and the liberals don't like him, and he's making a lot of noise, and he's making a lot of laws in Florida, a lot of conservative laws he's passing, and liberals don't like it, so they're going to attack him. So they're going to attack him in any way they can. But to say that he's a racist, I think that's taking a little bit extreme. I don't think that he's a racist per se. I think that he has certain beliefs, and he believes that hey, listen, he won his second governorship by a landslide. So a lot of people in Florida believe in him.
You've unpacked a lot. Shane, can he pick some points on there to respond to?
Well, what I want to do is read through the controversial statement because what we've had is Kamala Harris and people like Whoopi Goldberg and a lot of people, they're outraged about something. I don't even think they've actually read it. And the three of us read it, about 10 minutes before we went on.
Actually, I read it a couple of weeks ago. I've read there's 191.
200 and
I want to go ahead and
200
read
some pages, but
Yeah.
there's 191 areas where it mentions slavery.
right.
Yeah, correct.
Here, I'm going to go ahead and just read through it just so that we have a baseline. Yeah, just so we have a baseline.
So people know what the fuck we're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so the Florida standards are broken into so you've got a standard and then you have what are called strands, and the standard is kind of like an umbrella statement, and then the strands are kind of the supporting pillars that support the umbrella
The
statement.
subgroups of that, basically the subgroups of that particular topic.
Right. So the standard is SS.68.AA.2, and the standard, this is the umbrella statement, says the students should be able to analyze events that involved or affected Africans from the founding of the nation through Reconstruction. Then the supporting pillars, I believe there are like 7 of them, 7 or 8. We'll just go through the first few just so that we can put them into context. And I'll point out the one that's the controversial one. So we have the first one, which is 2.1. Explain early congressional actions regarding the institution of slavery, i.e., Northwest Ordinance of 1787, the 3/5 Compromise, and the Act prohibiting the importation of slaves of 1808. 2.2. Explain the effect of the cotton industry on the expansion of slavery due to Eli Whitney's cotton gin. The benchmark clarification, which is kind of like what the students would. The benchmark is kind of what the students would be assessed upon.
It determines the excess of how that was taught, correct?
Right. Yeah.
What they were supposed to learn, right?
Yeah. It's kind of like success criterion,
Right.
So what that says is based on for 2.2, it says instruction includes the use of a map to show westward expansion. Okay. Now 2.3. This is the one that's controversial.
This is the one that she's focusing her attention on.
Right. And this is the thing. It's really short, and none of them ever quote it. It's kind of funny how they never quote it. They never actually break it down. They never actually analyze it.
It's in total, it's 3 sentences.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So I think the important part here is the clarification or the benchmark point. The benchmark is what you're supposed to learn from this particular subject matter.
That's what she has a problem
Okay,
with.
so here, I'm going to go ahead and read through this, and then we'll talk about it. So examine the various duties and trades performed by slaves, and then it's got some examples in parentheses: agricultural work, painting, carpentry, tailoring, domestic service, blacksmithing, and transportation. And then the benchmark sort of clarification is instruction includes how slaves developed skills which in some instances, not in all instances, in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. That's really that's the crux of the controversy, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say so. That's her whole argument that slaves, there's no way that even if it was, I think that she even went as far as saying that even if it was beneficial to slaves, or how could it be beneficial for slaves if they were enslaved when they learned these skill sets? And my argument or my response to her would be whether they were enslaved people or not, right? As I referred to modern day jail systems now, right? If you're an incarcerated person and you learn skill sets, and you after you're stop being incarcerated and you use those skill sets to benefit you in your future life, right? That's a true statement. It doesn't matter how you learned them. If you can, and that's not just being incarcerated or being a slave or that's just life in general. If you learn a skill set, even if it is in deplorable situations, right? I mean, there's examples all over the world, right, where you've learned, and people, even in today's societies, and you go to these third world countries, people are like being put in. Like these, children, like they don't have child labor laws in some of the Asian countries, but those children are learning a skill set, right, in deplorable situations. But to say that they can't use those skill sets further, right, in their future life when they become adults,
if you took those children and they made it to America, could they use those skill sets
What if they
to
started
get a
business
better life?
and became right?
And a lot of them do. A lot of immigrants come over here. They use the skill sets they learned in deplorable situations.
Exactly.
And they thrive in a country that's free under capitalism with American values.
Sure, that gives them the opportunities to use those skill sets. So I think in this instance, Mrs. Harris is just completely incorrect in her assumptions.
I want to make one statement, and then we'll go. You're exactly right. Because in this country... And what they do is they race bait and they use buzzwords and it's filling. So you can't even take factual statements because to say that anything could come out of a tragedy and be beneficial to a group of people in their future, cultivate them into their future endeavors, we can't even say that. And the state knows that. The state knows that this was going to be controversial. They were such pussies when they even wrote it. If you read that the standard,
benchmark?
read the benchmark again. Listen what pussies they are.
Introduction includes how slaves developed skills which, in some instances, could be applied for their personal benefit.
Could be for the personal benefit.
Well,
Some instances could be. No, if you wanted to make that statement as a classification, they would say that the exactly how they would phrase it is the criteria would be in slavery, what skills were learned that benefited future generations. That's a statement. That's a standard. To say could, should, would have, could have, we know that. That's all taken. You don't have to say those things. That's already in it's already in the description. Of course they learned stuff that would benefit them in certain situations under deplorable situations. Why can we not admit these things in this country?
Well, it's not that we can't admit these things in this country. I think because under this particular circumstance, because it is supposed to be, it's under social studies, right? American, I'm not sure. I don't remember. You gave me a skill set. That number right there, is that middle school? Does that represent middle school? Number 2. That little thing that you sent me that shows the grade point breakdown.
Here, I'm pulling it up right now.
So you have to remember that this is an educational setting. These aren't adults, so you can't make a lot of assumptions. So they're learning this sometimes for the first time, right? So I think the statement was made broad on purpose, right? Because as adults, we can assume certain things. See, what's that number, that second level there, number 2? So what's number 2 say? 3 to 5. See number 2, 3 to 5? So third to fifth grade.
3rd to 5th, yeah.
So these standards are set up for 3rd to 5th grade, right? See what I'm talking about?
Yep,
See?
yep.
Yeah. So third.
No, 6 to 8.
No, it's number 2. It's this number here, the second number over.
Yeah. See, that's the second number. See, 2.3, and then the benchmark. And then the benchmark would be.
I thought this was a middle school criteria.
2.3.1,
It is.
yeah.
It is.
Yeah. It's 6 to 8.
What change?
Yeah. See how it's 3 numbers here.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought
You're
this
right.
was a middle
Yeah.
school
You're
criteria.
right. You're right.
Yep.
You're absolutely right. You're right. Because I was looking at the standard number and the level numbers. You're right. It's middle school, 6 to 8. So 6 to 8 graders haven't really been exposed to a lot of American or history in general, right? They're 6 to 8. I mean, they're just got out of elementary school, basically 6th grader. I mean, I didn't know. I put myself in those shoes, and I didn't know. I mean, I think Polk County schools during that time frame when I was in 6th grade, I think we were learning about Greek and Roman history. I remember. I only remember that because I liked the teacher. His name, I can't remember his name now. It was a Spanish.
Well, world history is still taught in middle school. Which one is that? Is that 6th or 7th grade?
I think it's 6th.
6th grade.
That teaches
and then
world history.
American history, where they double down on this, is usually 8th grade,
Right.
correct?
I think ninth grade I had. Right
Not
now.
high school criteria in middle school.
8th grade is American history, and then 7th grade is usually like American history light and civics blended in there.
Ninth grade is when I had civics. But American history is broken down from the beginning to a certain year, like like right at like
like like before World
Well,
War
high
II,
school-
like World War One-ish.
High-
Maybe
high
Civil
school-
War might have been the cutoff.
High school is usually
right
after the Civil War. So when you start
Okay.
high school, they start really talking more. They start off at the Civil War because they want to double down on when America became enlightened, basically, and that's when they teach all this other stuff. And then they go into our warmongering years, where
Right.
we start invading. Start
Yeah,
invading
the
across the planet.
the problem I see with this country is that, and it's very polarizing. So I understand why, but to actually sit down and have, with the African American community especially, to have a conversation about race and how you're never going to eliminate it because you're always going to have your knuckleheads or your extremists who believe in their beliefs and white supremacy and whatever the case may be. But the reason why I think, and going back to this why comments by Ms. Harris are so what's the word I'm looking for? So fire, why it brings up so much fire, right? Or why they're so insinuating is that nobody really wants to deal. Everybody wants to talk about, the atrocities and all that stuff, but nobody wants to sit down and help solve the problem. Everybody wants to put Band-Aids on it. So, and I don't know what the answer is or what the solution is, but I think it has to sit down with conversation and not with people like Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton who are, they're just, those guys are exploiters, right? You were saying groups like The View, okay? They have an agenda. They're going to exploit the left side, right? And there's a lot of conservative groups that do the same thing. I'm not picking sides here. But what I'm saying is that we have to sit down, and I have like I said, I referred to him before. I have a black friend, and we've actually sat down and had these conversations over a cigar and some good bourbon. Mm-hmm. And he made me realize that even though since the Civil War, right, all the way up to today, to just today, even in 2023, there's no way that a white man can walk in a black man's shoes. He refers to them as his people, right? And we kind of use it, we throw that term around kind of jokingly, but what he made me understand was that unless you walk through a black man's shoes and see life through a black man's eyes, mm-hmm. right? The stereotypes of black people in America are never going to be resolved.
That's the problem, is that there is no problem. Not on the level that we're trying to make it. There is no black history in this country. It's American history. We're one people. And the more we separate it, my people, you don't have a people. You're an American. That's the point. Every immigrant that came over here, they've all acclimated into American society. The problem is that we treat black culture as a completely different thing outside of American culture. That's simply not true. They are Americans. It's American history.
I agree with you there, but the thing that's very distinctive is when you refer to the first and second immigration rolls, like the first ones were in the late 1800s, and then right after the turn of the century, they had a big migration, which my grandparents came from, mm-hmm. right? So blacks have the distinction or hurdle, if you will, obstacle that modern day immigrants today from, say, Mexico, and
the European countries
and Korea. No.
Oh.
The European countries came and assimilated mm-hmm. into American culture. Now the difference was most of those that came over, the Irish, the German, the Polish, the Italians, they wanted to become American citizens. They wanted to immerse themselves in this country, right?
They still had their boroughs and their culture and all that, but they were Americans.
True. And they wanted, and in my grandfather's house, you couldn't, even though they did, it was discouraged to speak Italian. Mm-hmm. They wanted you to learn English, right? Because they were trying to immerse themselves in this country. Mm. What we have today And the blacks have always had, and this is the problem, is when you have blacks in this country, right, and you have Asians that come over, like Koreans and Japanese, and Mexicans come over, they're distinctive by their characteristics and their skin color. Europeans are not. Today, you would be hard-pressed to look at an American citizen who is white and say what ethnicity they are. You can say, oh, you're Irish, or you're English, or you're Scottish, or you're French, or German, because it's pretty hard to tell because you've had several generations separate you from. They immerse themselves in this country. It's hard for a black man to immerse himself in this country because his skin color is always going to give him away. He's always going to be black. And because of that, society has always, because of slavery and because of where they came from and because of their history, right? And they freed, and I mean, there's been many scholars, black and white, both have touched this. One of my favorite scholars, Thomas, I forget his.
Oh, Thomas Sowell.
Thomas Sowell, right? He wrote a beautiful book on this, and he explains a lot of the black history from the time they came over from Africa and through slavery, even to modern day, and why we have modern day societies or northern cities the way they act today, and why high crime rates. And he goes into it. I highly recommend the book. But the reason why is because they've been stereotyped to a certain area, right? To where, I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm down, and we live in Tampa, Florida, or very near it. Let's say you're down in Tampa, Florida, in a little area called Ybor City, which is kind of a party district. And it's about 2:30 in the morning, everything's kind of quiet down. And you see a big 6'5" black guy come around the corner. Now, this guy's kind of, I'm going to use him as an example. He's kind of a celebrity. He's a radio host here. His name is Mo. If you saw Mo walk around, he's a cat named Mo. Let's say you saw cat named Mo come around the car. He's got big, what do you call them?
Dreads.
Dreads, right? You see him, and you're a small, white, petite woman, right? You're going to feel threatened by that. Even though I don't know Mo personally, right? But I've been to events where he's been at, and I've listened to him on the radio, and he is one of the sweetest, nicest guys in the world. Now, if you see a small, petite, say, Japanese woman come around the corner, right? Mm-hmm. You don't feel threatened to her. What you don't know is that she's a world-class assassin, and she could cut your throat in a heartbeat and keep walking, and you wouldn't even know it. So it's the stereotypes that we put on black people per se, even in our judicial system, right?
Are those stereotypes? Or would we say that there's evidence to back up those claims through societal actions in current day?
Okay. I know where you're going with that. Mm-hmm. That you're going to talk about 70% of the people in our that are incarcerated are blacks, mm-hmm. right? And
because they commit the majority of crimes, not because cops are racist.
Well, that is one view to look at it. That's one way to look at it. And I'm not saying all cops are racist. I'm saying that the stereotypes that I'm referring to, because it's a perpetuating circle. So a black commits a crime, right? Or if you are, let's say you make, say, 8 arrests a day, mm-hmm. and 5 of those arrests are black people, mm-hmm. right? Eventually, it becomes a vicious circle, right? You start saying, oh, and I'm just talking one single cop, and take that ideology and put it in one police department, and then other police departments, and then just spread it across the United States.
But if they're committing crimes, and I get where you're going with this, it is a vicious circle, but that starts in the black community. You have to start healing the black community. Right. So that comes down to, we need fathers to stay in the household, because that's where it comes down to.
Right.
If there's present fathers, you wouldn't let me get away with that shit for a heartbeat. My ass would be whooped so fast. If I was causing shit on the streets, you would shut that down so quick.
Right. But let me finish my statement. So, and
then I'm going to jump in.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's not.
Sorry.
And I don't mean to steal the show here. So I'm not saying that. That there isn't any fault in the idea of parenthood or the family structure in a black family, because there in the black families that I knew that thrive, right, the mother and father are
All families, mother and father are present.
right. But I'm just saying from my
Oh.
personal experiences, right. But this goes on in white families too.
They don't care about race. Mother and father households, your child is guaranteed 99.9% of the time to be more successful than a broken family household.
Right, but it is a cultural thing too, because let's take the Japanese forever. Let me finish one thought first.
All right, and then I'm going to jump in.
All right. All right. So, in the black community, instead of even the black leadership, right, exploit the black community instead of sitting down and trying to help them. And I'm talking guys like Jackson and all
Al Sharpton and people like
yeah.
that.
Organizations like Black Lives Matters, all of them exploit.
They
Right.
exploit instead of everybody coming together as a society, as Americans, and solving the economic and social issues that the black communities have, right? They tried to exploit them. White liberals, I mean, Thomas Sowell said the best, right? White liberals, right, and in this case, majority Democrats, exploit the hell out of the black community, but they do it and they try to keep them like uneducated and dumb and bad.
They insult them. They don't think that they can get a driver's license to go vote. They don't think they're capable of obtaining identification to go to a voting booth. They said it's racist to have people do that. I don't know one black person that I know that doesn't have identification, doesn't have a driver's license.
There may be, but I mean,
there's white people too. To say that they're incapable of getting identification, go vote. That's the most racist shit I've ever heard in my life.
even though in theory they say voting is a right, it's also your right to choose not to vote. So if a black person chooses not to get identification for the sole purposes of voting, right? He doesn't have to. It's not a law.
No. The Democrats are saying they're not capable of doing that.
Oh, I totally disagree with that.
Yeah, of course, it's a racist statement on its
Right.
grounds. Just like saying if you don't vote for me, you ain't black. That's a racist statement.
When Joe Biden said that in
The
2020.
liberals are the most racist people on this planet. Go ahead, Shane. I know we.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so first thing, just kind of back to the to education.
We were going.
I think it's a really big deal the way that slavery is addressed in the curriculum, typically speaking. The lives of individual slaves are really never highlighted. And I actually think that's something that this curriculum is trying to address. To try to focus on what were the slaves doing. What and hopefully in there they're going to be highlighting particular slaves. So that they can kind of tell the story. This isn't just some abstract oppressed group of people with no real individual names, but they're just this amorphous blob of victims. Here.
When you say
hang
particular
on.
slaves, what were you referring like people like Frederick Douglass, famous?
Yes,
Like historical figures.
well, and even beyond people like Frederick Douglass, people that the three of us don't know the names of.
Right.
because they're not highlighted.
Right, because the thing is, when you learn about the Holocaust, for instance, in school, you end up learning the names of different people that were in the concentration camps and what they did, and even if they ended up being killed in the camps or dying in the camps, we still learned about what they did. We still learned about the perseverance of the human spirit.
Correct.
And I think the really important thing in learning about slavery is that we learn about the perseverance of the human spirit among enslaved persons prior to the Civil War. So I wanted to mention that slavery is oftentimes taught in a very, very different fashion from the Holocaust. That and also too, slavery is taught. It's taught most of the time as being the defining moment of Black history. And it's taught as being something that not only is the defining moment of Black history, but it just kind of sets the stage for all of it. That's the way every African American is supposed to view themselves, is in light of being descended from slaves. When we learn about things like the Holocaust, that is a subject that's taught with the same amount of gravity, which is very important. But it's also taught in the sense of that the human spirit still persevered in spite of that darkness.
Correct.
There's a sense in the Holocaust, or I'm sorry, there's a sense when slavery is taught of defeatism, which that's not the case. These are flesh and blood people that lived, and they in spite of very, very bad circumstances, they still thrived. The black family, for instance. The black family was more intact than the white family up until the 60s.
Late 1950s.
Yes,
Right.
Correct.
That's true.
And so the thing that I would argue is not even slavery could break up and dissolve the black family.
So what was the breakdown?
The 1960s, the welfare state, and when you removed and what the data says is when you remove the father from the home,
But the welfare state itself didn't remove
things
the
ended
father
up
from,
going to shambles.
But the welfare state itself didn't remove the father from the home, because you're right. The black family up until that time was a very close nucleus family.
Nuclear family.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they had
stuck together.
The point I think you're trying to make is that because they were forced to fend for themselves, just like everybody at that time was. But as soon as you started with these social programs, right, or as you refer to as the welfare state, it started, people were getting stuff for free. So it started breaking the family structure down, per se, because they didn't have to. The work ethic changed, in a sense. But I'm not sure how you make this the direct correlation that the welfare state removed the father from the home. I don't understand that correlation.
Well, what it did back then, and I guess a big part of it too, what was the sexual revolution too. The sexual revolution and the welfare state both happened at the same time.
Right.
And during the 60s, all the rage was breaking and slaying all the sexual taboos.
Well, to breaking just all
Right.
the norms, the accepted norms by society.
And what ended up happening was you had a situation where if the father abandoned the family, there was not as much of a consequence because of the welfare state. And in fact, there were many cases and many examples that can be pointed to. In fact, I could look and try to pull some up where it would be financially advantageous in certain circumstances for the family for the father to abandon the family in the 60s.
It took responsibility off
Right.
of because think about all the stories you talk about abusive alcohol fathers. They still even stuck with
Right.
family. I'm not advocating that. I know
So-
it's horrible. They stayed with the family because they had a responsibility.
Prior to the welfare state, the father was still the provider of last resort. As a result of the welfare state, the government became the provider of last resort. And you can see the breaking of the black family, the breaking up of the black family, and the decomposition and dissolution of it. And what's interesting is if you go and look at the numbers regarding a lot of white families today, especially Midwestern white families that live in places that used to have a lot of manufacturing, and the manufacturing's left, and there's a lot of trouble finding jobs where people can earn a decent living. It's really eerie how close the stats are to white families now to where African American families were about 20 or 30 years ago. There's a guy, he wrote, it was called, he's a Harvard historian, it was called Coming Apart, Charles Murray. And
You're saying what happened to black families throughout since the 60s is now happening in white families.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
Direct correlation.
It started
Oh,
to
yeah.
begin back in the
There's
80s.
There's no difference.
Yeah.
I looked it up. I can't remember what it is now, but the divorce rate in America it's I don't know, it's in the 70s, 72%, 73%.
Yeah, more children in America are born out of wedlock than not.
Yeah.
now,
I disagree with that stat and face value, but that's
Okay.
yeah.
What, divorce rate?
Yeah.
What do you think it is?
It's disingenuous, and the reason I say that is because they calculate in divorces among marriages. A lot of divorcees have been divorced more than one time. Most people that get divorced up to 3 times. People that are married and stick together in marriage and have never been divorced aren't fairly represented in that stat. So if you have a habitual divorcee, someone that's been divorced 3 or 4 times,
You're saying he's counted 3 times.
Yeah,
It's the same person.
skews it. Now, divorce rates have increased, even if you take that stat out of there, but it's such a astronomically laughable, comical number when you say 72%. Now, I do agree it has increased, and I think it's for the reasons you guys are saying, because there is no responsibility amongst the same with white families now. As soon as someone has a disagreement, you don't have to go to the extremes to abusive husbands and alcoholism. That's what the safety nets were put in for, so that you could get out of these hostile environments within the family. Now people could just have a disagreement and they're leaving the family because the social nets are there. They're readily available. The government is ready to suck at the teat. Bring your kids, bring this. You don't need him. We will pay. The more children you have, right, with different fathers, we will pay for them. So even if it's a disagreement on anything minuscule, people are separating at quicker rates. There's no nuclear family in this country anymore. That doesn't exist. There is no nucleus of family.
So I think something Shane said earlier, and it's I think my generation and you guys' generation and other generations, right, look at as marriage from a different perspective. There's, like you said, Shane, there's a lot of people that have kids out of wedlock because, you know, back in my day, when people got married and you had a child out of wedlock, it was, you still like, what's that story, the book with the red A, adulteress, the Scarlet Letter.
Oh, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
If you had a child out of wedlock, you were an adulteress. I mean, and there was a lot of shame attached to that. Nowadays, you could have all your kids out of wedlock and nobody even bats an eye.
I would actually argue, when you say back in my day, you're talking about it from a young man's perspective, looking at the things that were normal. I'd actually argue that you guys started this with the sexual revolution. I'd actually argue your guys' generation is what led to this.
So I'm actually going to push back on that because Ben, you're a Gen Xer.
No, actually, I'm not. I am the last year of the baby.
Okay.
I'm kind of a hybrid because
Push that, bitch.
Okay, well,
I'm kind
Push
of.
that.
I want to say that I am a hybrid, but if you were to put me, I mean, if you were to categorize me, I am actually the last year of the baby boomers. I think the baby boomers end in 64. I'm actually second to the last year.
you see, your demeanor, I think, is a lot more like that of Gen X than of the boomers.
I would agree with that statement.
Right, because
Yeah.
the boomers are really born in the 40s and 50s, and I was born in 63. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that makes me 60 years old. So, I mean, even though categorically, if you're going to categorize me, I'm considered a boomer, but I'm kind of, like I said, I consider myself kind of a hybrid because I kind of filter into the Gen X area, right?
I just picked it as a pinpoint. It wasn't specific to my dad. Obviously, he raised me, and I have these morals
Right.
and these values. I'm taking his generation.
Right.
I think that that's what led to the decay that we're seeing now. Is it was a rebellion against the structure that you guys had.
Right.
It was a revolution, even through music. They even call it the music. What's the
Like the music revolution or something?
It has
or-
a name, though. I'm just going to say the music revolution. Even through expressing yourself, you guys went against social order. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm saying it's led down through generations to we take that into extremism. We express ourselves freely sexually. We express ourselves musically, artistically. I'll just sum it all up. We express ourselves more. It's almost like there are no consequences. There are no edicts that we have to hold ourselves to because there are bailouts everywhere.
Now, let me tell you guys something. There's a conspiracy theory that I believe in.
Oh, shit.
Shocker, right?
Yeah.
Is that I think that after the slaves were freed and and Black Americans, went on to kind of establish their own communities. I think that elites and the federal government used them to do experiments on. And the reason that they did was that it was easy because they were all together.
I agree with the statement.
Now,
Keep going.
The things I would point to as evidence of that is
Well, what you're saying is a historical fact.
right, exactly.
I mean,
The Tuskegee.
The Tuskegee
and-
Experiments.
and-
To this day, as a matter of fact, not to interrupt you, but to this day, I ask a lot of my black friends, and I don't want to be the stereotypical like I am the white guy. I have black friends, so I understand. Or not. That's not what I'm saying.
He has 2 black friends. Clip it.
Clip it.
I actually have a few more.
We're just joking. Dad.
Clip it.
Clip it.
And what I'm saying is, I work in an area where there's a lot of black people and a lot of more professional black people. And I asked them, what is it about? And this is back in the pandemic, right? Remember, there was a lot of the blacks did not want to get the
jab,
the COVID-19, right?
The jab.
The jab.
I'm like, what? And I asked why. He says because they're scared of what the government and the experiments that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And they referred to Tuskegee because they actually experimented on a black community in Tuskegee, Alabama, with was it the polio vaccine? I can't remember what vaccine it was.
I think it was it might have been the earliest flu vaccine that they experimented on them with, that they started.
Right.
The Tuskegee, but it could have been the polio one though.
Yeah, for anybody who thinks the government is always doing something healthy or good,
Finish your point though. Keep going with that. Yeah,
and
roll
then
with that.
and then the other really big thing is all the modern push for contraceptives and abortion, and also to neutering human beings. That stuff was all rolled out by super wealthy people and the U.S. government funding experiments in the black community.
when you say neutering human being, you talking about chemically or physically?
Doing the surgery. I'm trying to remember what it's called. It was all part of the eugenics program. That was really big in America in the late 19th century and early 20th century. It's where they basically make it, because like the founder of Planned Parenthood was on board with all this stuff too. Oh man, I'm trying to think of what her name was.
So she's a racist bitch.
Yeah. The founder of Planned Parenthood, her name was I'll look it up in a minute. But she would.
I don't know who she is. A white woman.
Margaret Sanger.
She's
Yep.
a white.
And what Margaret Sanger would say was that she didn't believe that you should reproduce if you were poor, black, or had a mental illness.
And that's why abortion clinics, even though they're 14% of the population, 60-something%? Don't quote it. 60-something% of abortion clinics are in black communities.
Right.
Now, why would that be?
And
for 14% of the population.
And you see, the thing is, Margaret Sanger's organization, which later on became known as Planned Parenthood, it didn't, obviously in America, abortions were illegal in most states. In fact, I think across the country prior to Roe v. Wade. So what they pushed mainly were contraceptives, and she helped develop the birth control pill. But what her goal was, and what the whole philosophy of a lot of these people, it was to decouple family life and child rearing from sex.
They want to keep the black population as
Yeah.
small as possible. So destroy the family structure
But-
and kill the babies.
Yeah, but they use the black community to conduct their experiments.
Mm-hmm.
That's a
Rolling
fact.
out contraceptives and all that stuff. And like you pointed out with the Tuskegee stuff, and with even broader stuff, because there's a lot of information about medical experiments that have been done on African Americans that's still not declassified.
Right.
Because the government doesn't want to be held liable for it.
Yeah, you're right.
So when we do talk about racism in this country or stuff like that, this is what black Americans should be upset about. This is the stuff. Because at the end of the day, this is the greatest country on the planet. And I would say that we ended slavery. Well, because modern slavery now, there's more slaves in today's world than there were in the world that we're talking about. And you
That's
can't
a true
find,
fact. That's
you
true.
cannot find a modern white, I'll use the word white, I know this sounds ignorant, country that has racism today, because white people stomped racism out of their culture. England did it, France did it, and then America did it through bloodshed, but we ended slavery in this country. So whites actually ended slavery in their culture, even though it still exists everywhere else in the fucking world. In the world.
Well, and to roll this back back to where we originally started about education, right? Yeah, I think the federal government throughout history, the U.S. government, has intentionally tried to oppress black people,
Of course.
including their own history, because there's, like you said, you touched on it earlier, there is a lot of black Americans that contributed a shitload to this country that are never ever talked about. And black people in general are ignorant or not, no, I guess ignorance is too strong a word, aren't encouraged to learn about their actual history in America.
Because they're spoon-fed a history.
Yes, because they are. And then that's a problem with not only the Florida educational system, which I guess they're trying to fix, but just the historical educational system in the United States is that black people aren't, what's the word I'm looking for, aren't promulgated enough, I guess, because there are a lot of black historical figures that have contributed a shitload to this country that are never ever mentioned. And I'm a Western guy, right? I like a lot of Westerns. I like what I watch, right? There's a lot of Western history. I'm fascinated by the West. There's two that I can think of, and I'm sure there's much more, but two black American figures, right? And you made refer to like Frederick Douglass and a lot of guys, the famous guys that talked about abolition and and the ones that are normally talked about, right? But the ones that are talked about in American history are usually some way either directly or indirectly attached to slavery, because that's the hot topic. But there's a lot of black Americans, right? There's Medal of Honor winners from World War I and World War II. But back to what I was saying about the West, a lot of people haven't heard about Bill Pickett or William Pickett, and nobody knows who he is. Who's Bill Pickett?
I've heard the name, but I don't know anything about him.
So Bill Pickett was an American cowboy, a black American cowboy. Yeah, I think he started out in Oklahoma. Don't quote me on that. But he is credited with bulldogging. When bulldogging is a term used to, if you take a horse. And back then, you got to remember, these are cowboys. We didn't have the modern things that they have today. So they were free ranging. So he took off after a bull that broke off from the herd. And he jumped on top of the herd, grabbed on top of the bull, grabbed it by its horns, twisted his head, and drug it to the ground. Now, this is a Texas Longhorn. So his horns are stretched out 5 feet on each side of his head.
And that led to that today.
And it's used, after he retired as a cowboy, he became a rodeo cowboy. He's one of the most famous rodeo cowboys that ever exist, and he is credited with inventing that type of rustling down a bull. Now you got to remember, we're talking about 2,000-pound animal, right? Now, another guy, and this guy I actually like even better than Bill Pickett. His name was Bass. I think. Hang on a second. I'll tell you in a second. I got it. His name was Bass Reeves. Bass Reeves, a lot of people don't know anything about Bass Reeves.
Never heard of him.
Bass Reeves, right, was a descendant from slaves. As a matter of fact, I think he might have even been a slave himself. And he, to this day, believe it or not, 2023, he is arrested. He became the first black U.S. Marshal.
And he has more arrests than any U.S. Marshal,
Any
correct?
other U.S. Marshal in history.
Because he was a badass.
He faced down some of the worst criminals in the West, in the territories. He arrested them. He murdered a lot of them, right? Because they didn't want to come in.
Not murdered.
Well, okay. He shot a lot of them.
He killed a lot of these people.
He killed a lot of them, right? Yeah.
He defended the community.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
I take back the word murder. He shot a lot of them. But even then, he was not even allowed to enter the courtroom or enter the inner sanctum of the courtroom until he was actually partnered as a tracker with a white U.S. Marshal. And when that U.S. Marshal got shot and killed in a line of duty, Bass brought him back across a territory to another territory back to the circuit court.
This is that judge, right? The judge said, "Where's the marshal?"
He goes, "Where's the marshal?" And he took him outside and showed him. And he goes, "Well, I can do it. I can go get him." And that judge made Bass a U.S. Marshal, and he went out and got the guy, and then he went out and got a couple guys, and he went after this real famous criminal. I can't remember the name off the top of my head. And he actually arrested him and brought him back. And you got all these white people in the courtroom, and bats couldn't even enter a certain area of the courtroom. And the judge finally said, you know what? You're a U.S. Marshal. You can step right up here.
The exact thing. The judge says, "Where is the marshal?" And they said, "He's outside." He said, "What is he doing out there?" And they said, "He's a colored." And he said, "He's a U.S. Marshal. Bring him in here so I can hear what he has to say."
And they brought him in. To this day, Bass Reeves, probably one of the most famous black lawmen that we ever had in history, and nobody, including the black community, has ever heard of him. And my problem with that is that's just two examples. I can give you more examples, right? But these are two black guys that most people in America have never heard of these two guys, right? Now think about the accomplishments they did in their life. This guy, William Pickett invented bulldogging. This guy, fearless, jumped on top of 2,000-pound Texas Longhorn and rustled it to the ground off the back of his horse. Today, in Western circles, he is in the Cowboy Hall of Fame, or in Pro Rodeo Hall of Fame. He's a Pro Rodeo Hall of Fame cowboy, right? Inventing bulldogging, and nobody knows about him. Nobody knows about Bill Bass either, right? He is the most famous U.S. Marshal in American history. He has more arrests, right?
But it doesn't fit into that time period that we want to focus on.
Why? Because they're not attached to slavery?
Exactly. It's outside of it. And if it doesn't come through...
What about the Congressional Medal of Honor winners in World War I and World War II that were black?
No one's interested in that.
Right? So, and this is my problem, that Americans in general, including the black community, have been dumbed down and spoon-fed American history to what you referred to as the elites want them to know.
Victimhood.
Right? So when I talked about nobody wants to sit down and have an honest conversation when we began this podcast, right, is we have to enlighten Americans and African Americans, right, but Americans in general, to the contributions that, get rid of these stereotypes that are American, that say, oh, blacks are lazy, or blacks are criminals, or black, because blacks have contributed so much to American society, but nobody, including the educational systems, which this podcast is about, right, wants to refer to, because it doesn't set in their agenda, right? No, we want to keep them stupefied. We want to keep them dumb. We want to spoon feed to them. This is because they want to keep blacks and other minority groups, not just blacks, but because we're referring to...
We say they. We need to describe what it is. It is the government and the elites.
Right.
On an individual level, 99% of this country is not racist.
Right.
This country doesn't care about skin color. This country doesn't care about any of that stuff. We only care about it because they structure it that we have to talk about it. We have to care about it. No one actually gives a shit about any of that.
Right. Now, to play devil's advocate, take a different perspective, right? All the way, the right-wing group says, well, from slavery or from Civil War, to modern days, blacks have made huge advancements. And we got blacks that are doctors and engineers, and they can do anything they want, and they become presidents and congressmen and senators and all that. It's true, but that stereotype, because of their skin color, right, that still exists. Like I gave an example with the Chinese or the Oriental woman, and who was assassin, and the big, tall, fat black guy. Those stereotypes still, if you see a guy coming to a white woman's going to walk across the street and not put herself in that position with the black guy, right? Now, our generational wise, right, from decade to decade, have we gotten rid of a lot of those stereotypes? Yeah, but talking to black friends of mine, those stereotypes still exist today. There's still a disdain. There's still black people still look at white people in a cautious way, right? Because of the history that we created. And what I'm saying is that we should go back and tell history the way it was supposed to be. Now, a lot of people have, CRT, critical race theory, right? They're saying that critical race theory, and I don't know that much about it, but basically the premise of critical race theory was like white people were bad and black people were subjected to slavery. Okay. That's not necessarily the truth. If we're going to talk about history, and I don't have a history degree like you, right? But when I was in college, history was one of my minors that I enjoyed so much that I immersed myself in history, especially in American history, So if we're going to talk about history, let's talk about history from a historical point of view. Forget the grandiose and all. Hey, why did we actually fight the Civil War? Right, the Civil War actually started in the 1830s, right? And what a lot of people don't know is that there was a fort in Texas, and I forget the name of the fort. Forgive me, it's been a long time since I've taken American history, right? And you're not going to learn this in high school history. This is stuff that you have to either read on your own, right, or learn on some college level course, right? So there's a fort in Texas. It was occupied by the Union Army, right, or the Army of the United States, because it wasn't the Union Army then. It was the Army of the United States. And they did something that caused a ruckus with the civilians of this town in Texas, right? And there was a big infrastructure, and they had to break out arms and all that kind of stuff. It infuriated so many people in the South because there wasn't a good relationship between the South and the North. And most people think that relationship because of slavery. Had absolutely nothing to do with, well, I can't say it had absolutely nothing to do with slavery, but the main premise of that war, or that tussle, if you will, was that most people don't. You have to look at the way the United States was formed, first of all. So during that time frame, let me back up a little bit. So what most people don't, and Thomas Sowell talks about this a little bit. So Scotland back then was probably the most, if not the closest to the most ignorant country in the world. And guess who most of the Southerners were that settled in this area? They were Scottish. Irish and English people settled in the north. Ireland at the time was one of the most intelligent countries in the world, right? So you're bringing a bunch of cracker.
I would like that fact checked.
Yep.
I would like to bring, right? So you're right, bringing Scottish people into the South, right? Who are probably the most ignorant, redneck, cracker. And a lot of these words, redneck, ignorant, cracker, white trash, all that comes from those generational people. You ever heard of the statement called an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth? These guys, there was no law then. These guys would settle with knife fights until one died, and people would gather around. This is how the Scottish people resolved issues, right? If you don't believe me, the patron saint of Scotland is St. George. If you look at most, even to this day in 2023, if you look at most of the southern states' flags, the patron saint sign was a big red cross.
Red cross.
Right?
Yes, correct.
And if you look at the southern states today, most flags, and most people, even people in government, I don't even think realize why those flags are the way they are, or the history of those flags, is because they were created by Scottish people. And Scottish patron saint was St. George, and his symbol was the red cross. And that's why you see it on most southern flags. You'll see some significance, whether it's an X or
I know,
cross.
but we can't do a whole history of the last.
Okay,
right.
sorry. So I'm gonna. So we have a Florida regiment, right, that left Florida, made up of white troops, Seminole Indians, and blacks, and they all traveled across to put down that rebellion in that Union fort in Texas. They carried a flag, which is not considered a Confederate flag. It was called the Bonnie Blue. It was never accepted by the Confederacy, but it was one of the original Confederate flags. Even though the Confederacy didn't exist yet, it was a big blue flag with a big old white star. And the reason why, if you look at most of the southern flags today, they are a version of the true Confederate flag. Here's a big misconception that I want to correct today. Everybody thinks that the Confederate flag is that big red flag with the cross on it and 11 stars on it, right?
That was a specific Confederate battle flag, correct?
No, that flag was actually called a Confederate naval battle flag. It was a 4-foot flag by 4 feet, right? And it was carried on Confederate naval vessels. Each regiment, right, had its own. Each regiment had its own flag. Each Confederate regiment had its own flag. There's only 3 Confederate flags, and none of them represent the flag that everybody calls a Confederate flag. That is not a Confederate flag per se, right?
Well, it is a Confederate flag.
But it's not. It wasn't a Confederate flag
It didn't symbolize the Confederacy.
Right. It wasn't what they considered the stars and bars. Right. So the first Confederate looked like.
We need to start returning back to.
Yeah, we're way off. We're
Yeah.
going on a history lesson. We can't.
Yeah.
But we're talking about American history. I mean, this is the Black history. Okay, so You can look up the flags. There's 3 of them, right? One looks like the state of Texas flag today, but Texas, instead of the 13 stars, you have 1 star for representing the state of Texas. And then you have the second Confederate flag, which only lasted about 3 weeks, was a white flag with stars on it, but when it laid in the battlefield, it looked like a surrender flag. So it had a big broad stripe on it, which is called the Third Confederate, right? There's First Confederate, Second Confederate, Third Confederate. Those are the actual battle flags of the Confederacy, not what everybody refers to. But those flags were carried by the troops, and it was carried throughout. So to popularize or to grandiose a lot of the NAACP and a lot of these white supremacist groups, they carry this flag around. It's really got nothing to do. They try to turn it into a symbol of racism. The Confederate War was not fought over race, right? Lincoln didn't free the emancipation, the great emancipator, which everybody calls him, in black people, and everybody else calls him, Lincoln was a great emancipator. The Civil War started in April of 1861. Lincoln didn't free him. The Emancipation Proclamation wasn't free until January 1st of 1883. 2 years after the war started. Lincoln had no intention of freeing slaves. It was never. His advisor advised him, it's like, hey, we're losing too many white people in this war. The South was kicking the shit out of the North for the first 2 years. As a matter of fact, all the way up into Gettysburg, the South, we pushed the Northern armies. I say we, because I live in the South, right? In the South, had pushed all the way to Pennsylvania, to Gettysburg, right? We were pushing. We passed Washington up into Gettysburg.
Lee actually he could have burnt Washington at one time.
Yeah,
Right.
he could have burned Washington to the ground. So, because he made
And he decided not to the first time, and then the second time they lost the battle.
Right.
They lost the battle plans.
So,
yeah.
All right, so let's camp out here and not jump around too much more.
Yeah.
All right, so you have to understand North was industrial, South agriculture. To get rid of the slaves, because as part of their economy, to destroy the South, you had to destroy the agriculture. To get rid of the manpower, you had to get rid of the slaves, right? And that's one of the reasons why they freed the slaves. But if we're talking about American history, you have to know history. The war wasn't fought over slavery. It was double taxation. The goods would come into the deep water ports in the north, right? From
Let's bring in those. So yes, so
England,
that's the
France.
point was the slavery though, because
Right.
we could talk for the next 6 days on this
Yeah. So I guess to put it into
perspective.
Yeah. To put it into perspective, you had the whole debate that raged from the Jackson administration and even before that about the just and fair tariff, right?
Yes.
And Jackson never quite promulgated what that was. He kind of tried to walk the tightrope. And really every president after Jackson tried to walk the tightrope of trying to appease the northern elites and the southern elites to try to make the
As
tariff
Lincoln
just
did.
and fair.
Just as Lincoln did.
Well, then what you ended up having was the whole issue at Fort Sumter. Can you talk about that? Because Fort Sumter was where the revenue was stored, wasn't it, or something?
No, Fort Sumter was
regarding the tariff. There was some connection to Fort Sumter.
It was actually the governor
to the tariff.
It was the governor of South Carolina, and it was a Union fort that was taken over by the Confederacy.
No. South Carolina, they said
they left. That's what happened. South Carolina was the first state to.
there was no Confederacy.
Right. I apologize. The first state to secede from the Union. Right. So they kicked all the Union soldiers out of the state.
Right.
Attempted to. Right. So they took over that Fort Sumter. So the Union Army came down and to take the fort back, which they did. But it was a pretty bloody battle. But that was what they say, the shot that was heard around the world.
Wasn't the big issue a question? What wasn't so the South Carolina government, they were using nullification and saying we're either not going to follow your excess, what they called an excessive and unfair tariff.
Yes.
They said we're either going to use nullification or we're going to go ahead and collect the tariff. We're going to keep the money ourselves.
Yes.
And wasn't there some connection between that and Fort Sumter? something.
I believe Fort Sumter is where it was held.
Yeah, because
That's why Lincoln sent down to put down the rebellion.
right, because I think Fort Sumter, I think there was a treasury there or something like that where the actual revenue was kept. I could be wrong on that.
There may be. I'm not sure. I don't remember. But I know that the South Carolina tried to get the Union soldiers out of South Carolina because they seceded from the nation, right? And that's kind of where the first war, battle of the Civil War started.
Now this is a question I have. Don't most historians agree that the rhetoric about slavery during the time of the Civil War, that the North really didn't start ramping it up until, wasn't it during 1862 after the draft riots in New York City and all of there was a lot of turmoil in the North, wasn't there?
Yeah, there's a big
They ear tagged it on.
Yeah.
There's a big misconception that they're like, oh, the North was free states and the South was slave states. There was still a lot of racism and a lot of slavery going on in North states. Slowly but surely they outlawed slavery, but there's still a lot of animosity towards the black in the northern states. Yeah. And the other misconception I want to correct is say, the South was slave states. You understand that a slave was a piece of property, right? Not that I'm agreeing with this, but I'm going to tell you the historical facts. A slave was a piece of property, all right? And going back to the Scottish, most people that settled in the South were broke, ignorant, cracker, redneck, white.
You had to have money to have slaves.
Slaves, right?
Yeah.
A very small percentage of the Southerners would actually own like 2% actually owned slaves.
It was higher than that.
They were probably the English descendants too, weren't they? The slave owners, I'm guessing, were probably predominantly English.
Whatever they
Irish
were,
English descent.
whatever the percentage was.
I will never let the English off the hook.
It will be
Ever.
a very small percentage because slaves were expensive, and that people are saying, well, all the slaves were beat and all the slaves were mistreated. Think about this, okay? Let's say you have a car and you use that car every day to run your daily life, to get back and forth to work to make your money, right? Would you go outside and beat the fuck out of that car every day?
You wouldn't mistreat your car.
No.
Yes, that's the thing. It's an investment.
Yeah, it's an investment in property. Just like modern day farmers wouldn't go out there and beat the hell out of their fucking $3 million combines, right? Most Southerners weren't going out and beating their slaves because they beat them bad enough where they killed them. They couldn't work the fields.
And how would you replace the labor?
Right.
Because you put so much resources into it through money.
The training is like, this is the way I want you to pick these crops.
And the point you're trying to make is this was the exception, not the rule. Very small amount. Now, the problem is...
The way history paints it is that everybody owns slaves.
It was huge to the Southern economy. So it would destroy the Southern economy to get rid of slavery like that.
Agriculture, absolutely.
Now, we're talking about an
you
atrocity.
You could phase it out. And with the cotton gin, Eli Whitney, which I believe is one of those standards they talk about, is how did the cotton gin affect slavery? Well, slavery is something you could not, and our founding fathers understood this, right? But in a sense, and I know this is a strong word. I don't want to say they were cowards because they didn't address the issue right away.
Yes, they did. This country almost didn't form because of slavery.
Well, you're right. Thomas Jefferson wanted to create, but he bought land in Africa and created Libya, right?
Before
Liberia, right?
Liberia.
And the capital's Monrovia, named after the president.
Before he was presidency, we're talking before George Washington was president. This country almost did not form because of this thing. This wasn't a new issue. This was something that had built up tensions for a long time. That's why you had the division between the architectural North and the agricultural South. The problem that they couldn't overcome, they were not cowards. These men were giants ahead of their time. They led the civilized world into this. They said, we can't get rid of it because it would destroy our country. It had to be phased out. They didn't have a solution. They weren't cowards. They didn't have an answer for it. And that's where all this debate came up. That's why at the beginning of the Civil War, just like you guys said, they don't teach us miscarriage. No one was fighting this war to end slavery. It was ear tagged on by Republicans to win support because they were getting the shit kicked out of them by the South, and they had to stop this. We had deaths at an all-time high. We had no food was being sent. People were starving. Western expansion had stopped. Resources were being killed. You had the French, the English. No one knew who the fuck to support. They said if you support that, this country was rotting for 5 years, 600,000 deaths. They had to put it into this. They ear tagged it on. They pushed it, and they pushed it down people's throat because they knew they could end it quickly. If they destroyed the South and put it down, they would rather cut off the arm than cut off the head, and that's exactly why they did it.
Right.
And there was no glory to it.
And like I said, the word coward is a little strong. They basically, Thomas Jefferson even said in one of his letters, is that this problem is too complex for us to solve. We leave it for later generations, and that's they basically kicked the can down the field.
Well, and another thing too, the founding fathers thought in terms of the jurisdiction should be held in the hands of the locality.
Correct.
So from the frame that the founders were coming from, which is a very, very much colored by the philosophy of Aristotle. The idea of the locality as being the most real thing, and then the further away you get, the more abstract and less relevant it becomes. They couldn't conceive of a way of ensuring a country, a vast country, the size of the size of the original 13 states,
right?
Let alone any bigger than that. That was way out of their purview. But they could not conceive of a system that would have the power to restore personhood rights to enslaved peoples, that also would not be authoritarian and deny liberty to everyone, that would all at the same time not deny liberty to those freed peoples, if that makes any sense. Well, did that make sense?
Yeah, and you can look at the mindset of people back then too. I mean, whites consider blacks subhuman. I mean, that was the mindset. So,
that was a very British notion, though.
That
was not.
I would argue. Yeah, I'm with Shane.
The Spanish and Mediterraneans did not have that same perception,
because
that was not held by any culture before
Slavery
this.
in North America was brought over by the Dutch and the English. Slave trade was very, very what's the word? Lucrative for the English.
Well, remember
for the crown.
The Pope in the 1500s. Promulgated a papal encyclical banning Catholic countries from participating in the slave trade.
That's why the French now they didn't officially get rid of slavery until only a couple years before England, which I think England got rid of it 20 years before America.
Yeah.
And the French technically only got rid of it a couple years before England, but we talked about this. The French stopped the practice when the Pope, for the most part, when the Pope was like, I'm not down with this. The French pretty much were like, because you know how the French are when it comes to Catholicism. They're like, shit, the guy in the chair said it. We ain't doing this shit no more.
Well, and really what it comes down to, it's a question of personhood. That's really what it came down to. You had the philosophical conflict over slavery, which I think we've pretty well established is separate from what caused the Civil War to break out. Which is not something that has been taught very well in school.
Right. Slavery was part of it, but it wasn't. I don't believe it was the main cause.
It's the view we hold. Yeah.
Right. And what I would argue is it obviously was not the main cause, but when the North needed more fuel to
stoke the fire.
To continue to justify this, the Civil War, and to not settle for peace. They
would not settle for peace.
They turned to the issue of slavery. And what they did was they painted the slaves in a very abstract sense as these people that the Confederates were oppressing and that had to be liberated. But it wasn't really about restoring personhood rights. Because like you pointed out, they didn't roll out the red carpet for freed slaves.
No, they just kind of left them to their own.
Right, exactly.
It was a propaganda tactic that has led to us today still using it as a propaganda tactic. It hasn't changed.
Right, and a lot of black leaders today will still cite the propaganda piece that was sold to freed slaves saying you're going to get 40 acres and a mule.
Right.
They're still waiting.
Still waiting.
Yeah.
Right.
And they're never going to get it because that was a hollow statement. It meant nothing. It was only about trying for them to try to win a war.
Two quick things I want to say because I know we're kind of running along late on this, but two things. For as much, and this is again, this is propaganda that is set forth out there by communities, or at least the black community, or what they've been indoctrinated into believing by liberal Democrats, is that you really have to look at your history, especially your governmental history. If you look at a lot of this, L.B. Johnson too did a lot of this, but if you look at our founding fathers and the guys after that, some of the laws that were passed, the most influential laws to black freedom were passed by Republicans. And if you look at the historical voting records during that time frame, not one Democrat voted for the 13th, 14th, or 15th Amendment. And those amendments, if you don't know, and I'm going to paraphrase them once, one gave the blacks freedom, right? Two gave black men, not women, black men the right to vote. And three, the third one gave blacks the right to own property. And those were all passed by a Republican majority. Matter of fact, I know in one of them, if you look at history, Democrats didn't vote for any of those.
Right.
So now that we've established that,
Wait. One other issue,
Okay,
one
go ahead.
other point that I want to make is from the end of the Civil War, and the reason why I believe we have a lot of animosity today, and a lot of shit's thrown up by a lot of these Confederate groups, or a lot of these redneck groups, or whatever you want, or however you want to refer to them, right? Is from the end of the Civil War all the way to the Industrial Revolution, which is around the 1820s, right, or 1920s, sorry, right, is the way the federal government handled the Reconstruction of the South, and it just kind of came through and just destroyed the South. I mean, historically, you had carpetbaggers, you had people coming down here taking advantage of the South. And the federal government let a lot of animosity build up for 40 years. And to this day, you feel that animosity in Southern people, right? There's still that.
which was never Lincoln's intention.
No, but a lot of it was let go by, who was it, Grant? Who was it, Jackson? No, Jackson was before Lincoln, right?
Johnson. You're talking about
Johnson.
Andrew Johnson?
Who was the president after Lincoln?
Andrew Johnson was
Andrew
his
Johnson.
VP.
Okay.
Yep.
So Johnson and I think Grant afterwards led a lot
Grant
of those
was
things.
later, right?
Yeah.
Grant was later.
Well, I think
But
he
those
he
two or
got
three
elected
presidents-
right after Johnson, right?
Yeah, those two or three presidents right after Lincoln. I can't remember who they are exactly off the top of my head, but they let a lot of shit happen that should never happen. The Reconstruction period wasn't supposed to go the way they didn't follow Lincoln's plan, right? To bring the southern states back into the Union. They just basically raped the South, and a lot of animosity still exists today. I mean, you're talking about 30, 40 years of animosity between the 65 to say 1900s, right? That's 35 years of just getting slain. I mean, Southerners were treated worse than black people at that time. I mean, they were because they were so ostracized, right? Or at least in the same level, because I mean, historically, you could read factual history where a lot of the urban settlements that we have today, like in Detroit, Chicago, where a lot of blacks settled when they left the South, a lot of Southerners had nothing. There was nothing here, so they used to going up to find work. A lot of them were mistreated just as bad as with the black people were in northern states.
Well, because the North wasn't actually accepting it, because like we said, that's not what this was fought about.
They didn't roll out the red carpet.
No,
they
that's the
did not.
perfect terminology.
Yeah,
right.
So let's wrap that back into this right here, because I think we've established why that's important.
So when you really kind of take the document that has all the standards that was written by William Allen, what I think when you take it in totality, what they're doing is they're asking students not only to consider the life of slaves and the institution of slavery, but they're asking them to consider slavery's origins and the protests that certain founding fathers had, at least maybe not necessarily protests, but a desire to right the wrong of slavery. A lot of founding fathers called it America's original sin.
Oh yeah,
You know,
they absolutely did.
and
No, it was absolutely a protest. I think that was
Yes.
a perfect word you could have. They had human dignity of life.
Right.
They were appalled by this, and these are people that we are writing out of history as racist.
Yeah.
And a lot of them held that belief. Even ones that were slave owners, right? They were like, well, why didn't they free the slaves? I believe, didn't Thomas Jefferson free all his slaves at his deathbed?
In his will, and he gave every slave, I think it was a lot of money that he left each one of his slaves for them to go on and start a new life. And he had like,
He died broke. He died in today's standard. He died millions of dollars
in debt. Yeah. No, but I think he gave them gold or something like that.
I don't actually know. So
Yeah.
I can't comment.
Yeah, but he gave them, it was the equivalent of like in modern day like $50,000 or something like that.
But everyone always says
worth of assets.
Well, why did they even own slaves? It was a different time period, and they were wrestling with these questions. They were tussling with the morality or the sinfulness of owning another human being as property.
That's the problem that's one of the problems that we have today is a lot of people try to be indignant and try to put today's standards of morality on the people that lived 250 years ago. You can't it's a different time frame. There's different rules. Society was different back then. What's accepted norms then obviously are not accepted norms today, but you can't take your morality it's 250 years later with the knowledge, right, that you've learned from 250 years of living, right, and take that knowledge and say, oh yeah, they were all racist and they're all bad. But you know that now, right? Yeah. And even the founding fathers knew that what they were doing was wrong. But the problem is so complex, like Nico pointed out, right? That it was too difficult to solve there. But they were trying to come up with some ideas. And like you said, even Monrovia and Libya, right? So they were trying to work those problems. But in Jefferson's letter, it said the problem is so complex. And it is America's original sin. A lot of the forefathers said that. But we don't really know how to solve it yet.
Because we look back at the time and like, well, they should have just ended it. Well, we did do that, and that's why 600,000 people died. And no other country had to have a civil war and have 600,000 people die because they phased it out, and their economies weren't built like the American economy. They didn't have a huge swath of the country that was agricultural through slave labor, and another half that wasn't. It's absurd.
Well, and really two things. I think that, it's a, the slavery issue. It's a debate it's about personhood. It's a question of
it's the worth of a human life.
Right. Exactly. And the thing is, in many ways, I think it's related to the modern day abortion issue. In fact, I think the modern day abortion issue is a direct parallel to the debate and turmoil surrounding slavery in the first half of the first quarter of the American Republic. And the reason I say that is that people that supported slavery and said, I'm not talking about people that were conflicted about it like many of our founding fathers, but I'm talking about the people that would have actually believed in it and said, well, this human being is my property. In order to assert that claim, you're denying personhood, right, to the enslaved person in order to call them property.
Right.
And I know this is gonna be controversial, but when you say that you can terminate the life of an unborn person, that is you denying personhood to that unborn person. I think it's a direct line. I think it's the same thing. And people that are in favor of elective abortion today, I think, are on the same side of history as the people who were on the side of continuing the institution of slavery and denying the personhood of enslaved people and calling them property.
That's a lot to unwrap right there. But that abortion issue in direct correlation with slavery is another subject for another day.
Well, and the thing is, both are complicated issues. But I think the issue that's equivalent to slavery that we're grappling with today is abortion. And when people try to say that slavery was was an open and shut case, and everyone would have been on the same side at that time, that it was a very binary thing that you either had.
But I don't think it was an open and shut case. I mean, like we discussed before. I mean,
Right.
there's a lot of things.
That's not what Shane
No,
meant.
no. What I'm saying is that today, looking back, like what you said before,
He means from present.
yeah, today looking back, a lot of people say, well, the slavery issue, it was open and shut and obvious, and anybody that would have not wanted to abolish it immediately was obviously wrong, and it was obvious to everybody at the time.
Or a bigot or
Right.
whatever, right.
Well, the thing is, I mean, I'm sympathetic to that person. Yes, the institution was abhorrent, denying personhood
An
rights.
atrocity.
But
Atrocity.
right. But the thing that I would say, I would draw a parallel in the complexity of the slavery issue at the time to the complexity of the abortion issue today. That it's not a neat and tidy thing, but the fact is, you've got pro-choice people, or people that are in favor of elective abortions, that are saying, I'm going to deny the personhood rights of the unborn. Therefore, the pregnant person, whatever gender that person might be, should have the right to terminate that life. And that's based upon the premise that you have the right to deny personhood to somebody. And
I do think that that's going to have to be another podcast.
That's
so
a lot there.
Well, the thing that I would assert, which is something that I've asserted multiple times, is none of us have the right to deny personhood to anyone else.
Correct.
None of us do. And it doesn't matter if it's someone who's being it doesn't matter if it's somebody who is enslaved, and it doesn't matter if it's someone that's unborn.
Unless you're
none of us have a right
unless
to
you're mafia mob boss, then it's
Yeah.
different. Yeah.
Well, boys, we couldn't have run any further away from the actual.
No, I think we did. I tried to bring it back a couple times. Education.
So here, one last thought that I have that I want to say is, this is something that I like to say to people whenever I'm talking about things like slavery with them, and also to any other kind of like social issue, isn't it interesting that we're even conscious enough that we're conscious of the issue enough to say slavery was wrong, and we're conscious to be debating things like abortion and spousal abuse and stuff like that, because for the overwhelming number, or the majority of human history, these issues would not be
Issues.
issues. Yeah, these things would just be, I'm the most powerful one, therefore I have the right to do whatever I want. And I guess the final thing I'll say is that I believe the reason that these issues are issues to us today, that we're grappling with, that we view as being very, very important, is that we live in a culture that that Jesus Christ infused himself that Jesus Christ infused himself into. We're a culture post the encounter with the Lord, and the cultures prior to the encounter with Jesus Christ didn't give a shit about one group of people owning another group of people. They didn't. They didn't give a shit about infanticide. They didn't care about any of these issues.
That's because it's part of their culture. I mean,
That's what he's saying. The change didn't come until Christ.
Look at the Egyptians. I mean, they consider themselves gods. The Egyptian rulers consider themselves gods.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Everything they did was justified until Christ came and told you, and we had the moral compass to know that this shit was wrong.
And I think the difference is that I could be wrong here because I haven't looked at it completely. You're talking about polytheism
Polytheism?
polytheism against monotheism.
Not necessarily, because there's
one God before that for a long time.
It's really in light of the incarnation of God incarnating as a human. That is, that brings dignity and divinity to the human person in a way that no other religion does.
But when you say that most cultures, not all cultures, because I know Jewishism or Judaism was around, but when
They
you
still
say
don't
that-
have the incarnation, though.
Won't you say that most cultures before Christ were polythesis?
Yeah,
Right? They believe in multiple gods. Right?
Polytheistic. Yep.
Yeah, polytheistic. Thank you. So, I mean, the Carthaginians, the Romans, the Egyptians, the Greeks, they were all had multiple gods, right?
Right.
And the Sumerians. I mean, a lot of cultures, civilizations had multiple gods before. We really didn't become a
Monotheistic.
society, right, until after Christ.
The Jews.
Well, but that's only one. I'm saying for most. I'm saying most, right? After Christ, we have a lot of people, a lot of Christianity basically came about, right? Even Muslims believe in one God, right?
Which came after as well. Yeah.
Right, and Jewish have obviously always believed in one God. Yeah. The belief in Allah didn't come in until after Christ.
Now Socrates was a monotheist. That's why the Athenians murdered him was because he denied the gods. They called him an atheist, but he wasn't. He believed in one God.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
The concept was definitely, yeah.
The majority of civilizations before Christ believed in multiple gods. And
Correct.
after Christ, the societies made a theological shift, if you will, to believing in one God, right?
Yeah.
I mean, except for maybe in the Orient where you had Hinduism and in what's the other religion?
Buddhism,
Buddhism.
which is kind of related, right? To
Yeah, Buddhism and even Hinduism, there's multiple gods. But in Buddhism, it's not even they actually don't even believe in a god. They just look at Buddha as a spiritual power. But that's an ancient religion that's been around for
and to
thousands.
follow his teachings, right?
That's been around for thousands of years. But I think the cultural shift between believing in multiple gods and one God was made right around the time Jesus Christ was born.
But the point of this is you're saying the moral compass for modern society shifted through Jesus Christ that let us be able to even grapple with the morality of these questions that were just commonplace.
Well, and it's interesting because that's one of the things that that a lot of historians note. Some people will say that Jesus existed, but he didn't, but he didn't claim to be God, or that somebody named Jesus existed, and most people will agree that something happened. Something significant happened
around that time period, yeah.
And what most historians agree on, and also anthropologists too, is that the world pre Jesus was radically different from the world post. Pre Jesus, God or the gods were on the side of the winners. We're on the side of the heroes,
right?
And post Christ, God is on the side of the victim,
or the common man.
Yeah, exactly. And so the thing is, I think in some ways, and I know this is getting into a little bit of.
You're way off topic.
Yeah. This is getting into well. I think both of us have been off track.
I feel like a fucking rodeo cowboy trying to rope you guys in.
But the thing is,
let's get back to, let's wrap this up on the edge.
Okay, so back to slavery and kind of bridging the gap here. I think in many ways one of the reasons that especially non-religious people, in light of the culture having been Christianized,
take it back to Kamala Harris.
That's what he's doing. That's yeah.
So in light of our culture being a Christianized culture, in spite of people not being religious, we still have a Christian bias. Well, I think the three of us would agree on that. Even someone who's an atheist still comes to the table with kind of a Christian bias, notions of universal morality and
it's kind of yin and yang. Is basically atheist is the denial of God.
Right. Yeah. Denial of God.
But they still use a Christian compass.
Yeah.
They won't admit that.
And they still use Christian terminology and stuff.
Because God is a Christian entity.
Because our laws were written on Christian morals.
And I think one of the reasons that, a lot of liberals who are social justice warriors, they profess to be atheists, but who is it that they go to bat for and they spend a lot of time on? They spend a lot of time thinking about people that are downtrodden and oppressed and all kinds of, and victimized and everything. And they may even embellish it a bit, But those are the people that they spend a lot of time thinking about and going and protesting on behalf of and stuff. And I think the reason for that is that they have a notion that they become closer to God, even if it's an unconscious attraction that they have to it.
God or justice, and their version of justice.
Well, I think justice reflects the nature of God. And people that have never encountered God, I think that's one of the reasons that they become attracted to things like justice.
I think an atheist would disagree.
Well, this is the thing. They can disagree all they want, but they are still going to be attracted to things like justice, and they're going to have a bias toward the victim. And what I would argue is that's because they grew up in a culture that was fundamentally changed by Jesus Christ.
Okay, so
I don't know about Jesus Christ, but I think it's more in line with justice and more
I'm
in line
gonna
with
take
morality.
our next podcast with the three of us. I'm pinpointing it now, so because we got to wrap this up. I'm going to pinpoint it. We are going to go on 2 subjects that are going to link beautifully, and it will give us 2 hours to talk about them. So the point of earlier when we were talking about, we went down the road, not on the historical aspect, but we went between abortion and slavery and the morality aspect of them being very similar and why we're debating them. And then we're going to tie that into, because the reason that you preluded to that is after Jesus Christ, the moral compass of Christianity that the world set itself by. Even, as they tried to get further away from God, they still use that compass, right? They still use that Christian compass, after Christ, died for our sins. So that will be the next podcast. We'll kind of go into that with the three of us.
I don't think the world tried to get away from God. I think the United States started, our founding fathers started that when they tried to keep church and state separate, secular. We're a secular country.
Well,
no other country is like that.
That will be part of your argument. I disagree with that statement.
I disagree with that statement too. Why don't we talk about that too?
Yeah, we will.
We could talk about whether the United States is founded upon Christian values,
Okay.
Christian philosophy, Christian morality, or not.
It is.
It's all pinned on there for the next podcast. We're all going to have point of views. I would like to do one closing short statement each on this specific thing so we can move on in the next podcast. Not the next podcast we do, but the next one you're on, which I believe will probably be in about a month.
What specific thing? Because we've talked about a lot of specific
The
things.
specific thing is we know why Kamala Harris is angry. We established the misinformation in history.
I don't even think she's angry. I think she's just exploiting the situation.
Is it okay? So your final statement. I want with this exact topic right here on the screen, and why you think Kamala Harris has a problem with it. But I need a 30-second snippet so people can leave with something. And I
think she's explaining the situation. I think I said it earlier. Ron DeSantis is very conservative. He's a complete opposite view of what she is. And to help destroy Ron DeSantis, she's got a bang on the state of Florida because of his rules and everything, because they've already turned down critical race theory, which, in my opinion, and I read some, I won't say I'm not an expert on critical race theory, and I'm not saying that I read the whole thing, but what I read about critical race theory is basically the point they're trying to say is whites were bad and blacks were mistreated. True. I'm not saying all whites were bad. I'm not saying blacks weren't mistreated, but it's a skewed view of history. And I think that Dr. William Allen is trying to correct that and put it into history. And I stated this before. If you're going to talk about history, then tell the truth of history. Mm-hmm. Don't tell a particular viewpoint of history just because you want to push forward your agenda. And I think that's what Kamala Harris is trying to do. She's trying to push forward her agenda, and to trash Florida and trash the governor of Florida for letting these things happen because it's a political ploy.
Got it. Shane?
So we're talking specifically about Kamala Harris?
I feel like this is really hard for you guys.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
So Kamala Harris, along with a lot of people that are on the radical left.
Is it Kamala or Kamala?
I think it's Kamala.
Kamala.
Kamala. Okay. Well, I've heard people call her
Kamala.
Yeah, Kamala, But I call her Kamala, and I sincerely apologize to her if I'm mispronouncing her name.
I don't give a shit.
Oh, easy.
We know you don't.
I don't.
But I guess the thing I would say is the way she views history and the way she views human relationships is that the source and summit of human relationships is exploitation. You know, that when she goes and looks at a historical period, what she's looking for is an oppressor and a victim. That's the standard. That's the framework that the people that adhere to her political ideology are looking for. You mentioned critical race theory. That's the core of it. You're always looking for oppressor and a victim. You know, that's textbook Marxism. Now, that's juxtaposed with the Christian notion.
That's two big words.
Yeah. So the really the Christian notion framework, which is that the summit of human society, the summit of human relationships, the summit of everything that it means to be human is love. And when I say love, I'm not saying like a sexual revolution,
Right, you don't mean it
loosey-goosey.
sexually.
What I mean is the way that St. Thomas Aquinas would define it, which is to will the good of the other.
Right.
You know, that is the height of it. Now,
To love your brother.
right, exactly. Now, with that being said, the Christian would also say that you can have other disordered forms of human relationships in history.
Short.
Okay, and you can identify those things, but those things are perversions of what should be. Those things are perversions of the true reality.
Right.
And what we should all be working to do is to restore love, you know, willing the good of the other, to become the core of human relationships once again, you know.
So mine is going to basically be, I'm going to summarize how I interpreted what both you said mixed together, and these will be my parting words. So the reason I think she has so much outrage towards this, and the reason we went down so many different paths, is because they do all mix together. If
I just realized I didn't really even...
you didn't answer the question at all, so that's why I'm going to wrap this fucking thing up. So the reason we explored all those different paths and that we did is because it comes to the simple fact. If she cannot let facts be taught because emotion is what moves the radical left. So facts don't care about emotion. So their mantra is make them care. So instead of teaching historical fact, we have to keep the veil, like you said, not lifted. We have to keep black culture suppressed in victimhood. That's why we can't have any positive come out of this. There cannot be 1 ounce of, well, this is why black culture went this way. It has to be suppression. It has to be victimhood, and they can't sell it if it's not. So they have to keep that shit selling.
It's not pretty. It's not a...
So if they can come out and make this another tragedy, make it another thing, get people emotional enough about it, it doesn't even matter.
Right.
But we will not teach facts. We only teach emotion. And that is the direction this country is headed. And that's why I think she's outraged, because if the jig is up, if we just let stuff like this pass.
No pun intended.
They can't let that go. So that's my final statement. I don't even know if I could wrap up what you guys had, but I tried.
Could you summarize this talk in one word, using one word?
Can I get one sentence? One short sentence?
If you want to be all over the place, I guess so.
Wait, you want me to summarize this podcast that we just had?
Yeah. This conversation.
Anarchy, chaos. Any of those was we did it. Do you mean this specifically, or what you guys just made me go through?
This whole conversation that we had.
Oh yeah, anarchy or chaos. Holy shit.
Well, the word I would use is carnival.
Oh, carnival.
Yeah. Ben?
Intuitive.
Intuitive. I
Okay.
like it. Boys, it actually was a really good conversation, and
Yes,
we
it
uncovered
was.
a lot. Guys, hope you
Yeah, we
enjoyed.
went off on tangents. There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff.
We have a
happening.
tendency to do that. That's fine.
But I think we opened up a whole bunch of other trails.
Future topics.
Yeah, that we're gonna blaze. Yep. All right.
All right,
Well,
gentlemen.
All right. Bye
Good
bye.
advice. Love
All
you
right,
guys.
Thanks
Bye.
for watching.